It's time for the Las Vegas Sportsline, brought to you by the Sunset Station with sports director Chuck Esposito. Presented by WagerTalk.com.
Welcome to the Friday edition of the Las Vegas Sportsline. We are minus Chuck Esposito today, who got called into a meeting, and meeting has to be attended, so we will be without Chuck today. But we'll tell you about some cool stuff happening at Sunset Station this weekend. And I think we should mention right off the top, soccer fans are going to be there in force tomorrow because it's the big game between Liverpool and Tottenham. And if you're looking for a great place to watch all the action, make sure to head down to Sunset Station. They'll have the hockey game on as well. That's a Saturday game between the Bruins and Blues, Game 3. And a little basketball action as the Warriors and Raptors continue their series. And we'll start talking about that, Teddy, right at the top. Teddy covers us here. I'm Dave Cokin.
So Game 2's on Sunday.
Sunday, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I knew that. That's why I didn't put it in the Saturday. But yeah, that might have been confusing on my part. John Lyons is going to be in later on, by the way, from Lyons Physical Therapy to tell you some exciting news about a new facility they're opening up. And we'll talk a little bit about the Kevin Durant injury and why whatever they're trying in rehab apparently isn't working very well.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear his take on what's going on with KD because, last night was the first time since he got hurt that the Warriors really missed him.
I think so.
And they missed him a lot.
Yes.
His length would have made a difference. His shooting would have made a difference. And he's the kind of guy that when he's on, he's essentially indefensible. And Toronto's defense was pretty darn good last night.
They played a great game. And listen, it wasn't Leonard who was the key guy. I mean, he was obviously important to Toronto last night, but one of their other big guys stepped up and had a monster game last night.
Well, yeah. And not just one. I mean, Siakam's the guy who's going to get all the love. And he hit, tough shot, clutch shot. I mean, he had one of those nights that people remember and where you make a legend for yourself doing that in the NBA Finals. But he certainly wasn't the only one. Van Vliet, who was awful for the first, half of the playoffs, more than that. The last 3 or 4 games, he's been a real difference maker for Toronto. And I thought last night, in the first half, he was as good as anyone on the floor for the Raptors. And then Marc Gasol, the old wily vet, stepping back and hitting threes. Danny Green hit 3 threes last night. He's been invisible for a while. I mean, Toronto had a lot of different guys step up, and they were able to win and win by margin, even on a night where, Kawhi's shooting touch wasn't there. And you make the argument that the Warriors defended him very, very well.
I think this was probably a mostly good result for the house because, it's Golden State. And people don't like to bet against Golden State. Now, the sharper market, though, did have they had a win with this game. They were on Toronto early, and that turned out to be a right side.
Yeah, and really, if you're talking about books that cater to a public audience, they did very well last night.
Yeah.
There's no question. Any sportsbook director you talked to in town was saying, the tickets are 3-1, 4-1, 5-1 in favor of Golden State. All the parlays have Golden State, et cetera, et cetera. So when the Warriors went down, those sportsbook directors are smiling on a Friday morning.
And they'll probably be in the same position come Sunday.
It
Perhaps
sure looks that
even
way.
more so. Because I think the betting populace is going to look at this and say, well, the Warriors are going to bounce back here. And they might be right. The Warriors might bounce back. But certainly from a betting standpoint, that will be the massive popular opinion, I would think. I mean, there's a certain school of thought out there that's going to say, well, maybe this is real. And maybe the Raptors are just as good as the Warriors at this point. But I think the majority of the betting public and the majority of the sports fan public is going to look at Game 2 and say, comeback time for the Warriors.
Well, I mean, when you look at the series price, if you think that it's comeback time for the Warriors, you better get to the window and bet the series right now because there's been nothing but Raptor money. And we're talking, 145, minus 140s, prevailing number minus 150 in town. But if you shop around, you can get Golden State cheaper now to win the title than you could have if you bet them last offseason.
Yeah, isn't that something?
Well, it speaks to why you don't bet NBA futures.
Not unless you're taking a deep long shot that you're not.
What doesn't matter? The long shots don't cash,
and they don't get there.
Not in the NBA.
It's not the same as the NHL.
Not even close. Literally, you don't bet. If you want to bet NBA futures, you bet who's going to win a division or a season over under win totals. But when you talk about who's going to win the title, the favorites tend to win the title. And when the Warriors were literally like minus 180, and now they're less than that after losing game one. And frankly, I mean, it's not like we couldn't possibly see the Raptors put together another game like the game we saw last night. And it's not like Curry or Thompson were off. I mean, the Warriors Splash Brothers were hitting shots and making plays, and every time that they were open, they were draining stuff. But the supporting cast around them just wasn't there, and it was for Toronto in Game 1.
Well, Toronto's certainly going to have a ton of confidence taking the court in Game 2. The Warriors won't be lacking confidence because they are the Warriors. It really does set up to be a tremendous basketball game, and if there's some mandatory sports fan viewing this weekend, it has to be Sunday's Game 2.
And look, I don't get surprised by opening lines very often. I was surprised by the opening line for Game 2, and I was even more surprised. Once I saw the opener, I guess I shouldn't say I was more surprised. But to see that number get bet up, I mean, I really thought that the books would be adjusting for the zigzag here. I thought Golden State would be laying 1 or 1.5 or 2 or 2.5 in Game 2. And that wasn't the case. I mean, they opened Toronto minus 1.5, and they've taken nothing but wise guy Raptor money ever since. So this is one where I was legitimately surprised and dead wrong, not only on where I thought the number was going to open, but where the number moved after it opened. And that's when you're right, we crow about it. When I'm wrong, you don't want to shy away from it. This is how often you get a point spread off by 3 or 4 points at this stage of the season.
Seriously,
I don't miss many by that like that. But it also shows the support that the Raptors have in sharp betting markets.
I think in the eyes of a lot of people, they have proven themselves to be more than just this team out of the East that has good regular seasons and doesn't do much in the playoffs. They've adjusted for that this season nicely, particularly with the way the Milwaukee series started, because the opinion after Game 1 in that series was, well, same old Raptors, see you later. They had the Game 1 and then blew it.
And they got bombed
in
Game 2.
And then they get killed in Game 2, so it's like, well, that's it for them. They're rolling right now, and they're not. And I think the big deal here, and I think maybe this is the weird difference between the Rockets and the Raptors at this point. I do think the Rockets are mentally intimidated by the Warriors, and that's why they can't finish them off. And it's happened a couple of years now where the Rockets really had every opportunity to win the series and couldn't do it. Toronto, which has this ugly history of folding up like a cheap tent in the playoffs, has gone in the other direction, and they're feeling something right now that I think does make them dangerous. Do I think they're going to beat the Warriors 4 times? Honestly, I don't. I think Golden State's still going to win the series.
That's it.
But I'm not as convinced about that as I was prior to seeing last night's game.
Sure, but I mean, last night, everyone that could play well for Toronto except played well. And it's not like
Lowry.
Leonard had Lowry had again, we went to, you list 6 different guys for the Raptors that had big games. They hit close to 60% of their 2-point shots, and every clutch shot down the stretch went in.
So there's a bounce factor that could be coming here.
Well, I mean, if I have to make one bet right now, it'd be Warriors to win the series. I think that's the bet to make at this point. For the only time since the number came up, you're actually getting potentially some value on that bet. And Golden's, for as good as Toronto looked last night, there's something Klay Thompson said that's very real. He's like, hey, we're not going away.
No, and look, if Golden State wins Game 2, they actually, they're going to go back to 350? 400, because they'll have home court advantage the rest of the way as well.
Oh, yeah, it'll be just like the opening number.
I think it'd be even higher.
Yeah, and sure. And even if they're down 0-2,
But then it gets a little bit tight.
Sure.
Okay, then it's like, they're going to win 4 out of 5 now. This isn't going to be easy.
But it's a team like the Warriors is capable.
Oh, sure.
And honestly,
although, and I will put an asterisk on that.
Uh-huh.
Because if they lose Game 2, then you have to really start to look hard at, wait a minute, maybe they can't win without Durant. Maybe it is that much of a difference maker.
If I'm going to make a bet on Golden State to win the series prior to Game 2, which I expect I'm going to do, I haven't done it yet, but I expect I'll do that before the tip on Sunday, and they lose Game 2, I have to follow that with another bet on Golden State for Game 3.
Then you're going to get plus money on top of that.
Exactly. I mean, it's not like, all right, well, my opinion of the Warriors is going to be changed by the fact that they're having a 2-game skid in the postseason. Golden State's not going to be an easy team to beat 4 times. And Toronto's success last night, again, they hit all the clutch shots and nobody except for the Splash Brothers had a. I mean, Draymond Green had the weirdest triple-double ever. First, he had the, that I've ever seen. He had a min triple-double, 10-10-10, and he played a.
He wasn't
play
real
a good game,
no.
I mean, the Warriors' transition defense wasn't there last night. Kerr was going nuts on the bench talking about it. And interestingly enough, the game was played at a relatively slow pace. He ended up flying over the total
it did.
because the free throw shooting was so good, and of course the two teams combined for 25 3-pointers. But Golden State's talked a lot about slowing it down for game. We can't give them the transition buckets. We can't give them the transition buckets. We've seen the total adjust up for game 2. I wonder if that total's been adjusted in the wrong direction.
On the ice, they're off tonight, but game 3 tomorrow back at St. Louis. And the Blues now have the home ice advantage for what it's worth, which isn't very much in the NHL. They're tied at 1 game apiece. The Bruins were the dominant team in game 1. The Blues were the dominant the dominant side in game 2. You know that crowd is going to be absolutely insane on Saturday at St. Louis. I think it's imperative for the Bruins to come out and play well, as they've done for the most part throughout the playoffs in the first period. They didn't in game 1 of this series, but the Bruins have been a very good first period team throughout the playoffs, and I think they need to show that tomorrow and get the first line going. Boy, if the Blues get ahead this game, the Bruins could be in real trouble. And I know that's obvious if you fall behind 1-0 in a game where maybe 6 goals are going to get scored. You're obviously at a disadvantage. Simple math. But I think from a mental standpoint, it's important for the Bruins to get out of the gate well in this game after being shellacked in game 2 at home.
What do you make of the injury situation for St. Louis? Because the one thing that I'm hearing about, that Sundqvist matters. Look, I'm rooting for the Bruins as a fan. That's a terrible suspension. Mm-hmm. It just is. I mean, the player for the Bruins was out of position, and it was a legitimate 2-minute penalty. It was not a suspendable offense. I thought that was a bad decision by the league officers. I understand you're legislating and ruling for player safety, and the guy did get hurt in the play. But it's still a collision game, and I thought it was just a minor penalty, and I think St. Louis kind of got a screw job on this one. Not as bad as the Golden Knights.
No.
But nonetheless, there are a couple other guys for St. Louis that are really banging. Thomas, Dunn.
Well, the most important guy is playing though. Tarasenko is going to be out there tomorrow night.
Right.
I thought the Blues played close to a perfect game in game 2. I have a tendency to believe the Bruins are going to bounce back here. I would be very surprised if the Bruins don't win at least one of the 2 games in St. Louis, and I think I would favor them more in game 3.
Sure, and from a betting strategy, to me, it makes sense. You put 1 unit on the Bruins for game 3, and if they go down, then you put 1.5 units or 2 on the Bruins for game 4.
I think it makes sense. We'll see how it plays out, but it's an exciting series now with each team owning 1 win, and who knows what's going to happen from here. Meanwhile, lots of baseball to go over tonight. Some really good series taking place this weekend. We'll look at some of those right now as we go to the Friday MJ Christensen Diamonds 4 at 4.
1, 2, 3 into the 4.
Put them 4s up. Put the 4s up, I said. Do it right now.
Tonight's action is just around the bend, and the guys want to get your night off to a great start.
4.
It's the Las Vegas Sportsline's 4 at 4.
Not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4. Unbelievable.
Cubs and Cardinals is where we start. Now, the Cubs have gone a little backwards lately. The Cardinals have gone a lot backwards lately. This has been a bad month for St. Louis. This team was 21-10 heading into May. They sure aren't that anymore.
No, sir.
A lot of things just not going well for the Cardinals. Cubbies, look, they're loaded, okay? There's not too many weak spots on this team, but the starting pitching occasionally goes bad for them. John Lester has not been good lately. Yu Darvish, who looked like he was getting into form, was not good in his last start. Their bullpen is still a little bit shaky. I don't know. I can't be confident with the Cubs here. Miles Michaelis on the mound for the Cardinals, and he's a pitch-to-contact guy. Everything went right for him last year. It hasn't been as easy a road this season. This is a real toss-up game to me. I had a tough time figuring this one out. The one thing I do know, and this is an absolute sure thing, is there's going to be a standing boo for Chris Bryant tonight. This will be the first time